All right, welcome back, guys. This is part two of the Developer Roundtable with Joppa, Joppa Perkins. Just continuing on from our October part one, where we answered a bunch of questions for you guys that you threw at us that you really wanted to know. We've got around 50 odd questions, and we've got through about, I think, 13 or so. So we'll make another dent in this and see how far we can get through today. But yeah, please join me in welcoming Joppa. Welcome back, mate.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Excited to do round two.
All right, so jumping straight into it, we've got an economy question. So many are concerned about the how the game economy will function and whether it will be able to avoid some of the social and economic pitfalls seen in other MMOs. Regional markets have been mentioned as a step towards avoiding these, but is it enough? Given this is a huge topic, can we talk more about some of the goals that we're working on in Pantheon for basically markets, trade, economy?
I think it's a little early to get too deep into that question. I think regional markets in and of itself is kind of enough to chew on for now. And when we get to that point, probably sometime in alpha, where we just have a larger group of players in and playing, and the economy is actually better able to get up off the ground. I think we're just going to be in a much better situation to start looking at that more critically and answering that more definitively. Obviously, having good gold sinks, I say gold sinks, I mean money sinks that are meaningful and actually feel good to build up towards and spend on is going to be a big part of that. And as early as this next pre-alpha 5 session, we hope to have a few of those things in, and money making and just the acquisition mechanics being more prominent. And but that to say, like, we're still pretty early in as far as things go with economy, and so probably better to save that question for a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, good point. It's a huge question too. Lots of details. Too big to kind of unpack in one little small sitting. Alright, so we've got one on gameplay. Sessions versus XP. So some statements have implied some form of soft restriction on leveling for players playing beyond the designed session length. Is there to be an XP penalty mechanism based on played time?
No, there are no plans for anything like that.
That is awesome. So development, personnel, we've got a VR's CTO worked extensively through most program systems in Pantheon. In light of his leaving, can you give any encouragement to us that this will not significantly delay ongoing development? So this is Daniel's leaving. A few questions popped up around this, and because it's a few months after the fact now, it feels like it's a little bit in the past, but yeah, a little bit of questions around his leaving and how that'll impact us. Which I think
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and it's a very natural one. And I spoke to this a little bit around the time when it happened, and it's very interesting because I think in some ways there's some parallels between that and something like Brad's passing, which you really can't get more significant than that. And the best answer I can give, and what I hope we are continuing to testify to, is the fact that Pantheon is bigger than any one person. And while people coming and going have varying degrees of effect, personally, emotionally, and then also where actual productivity is concerned, we've been incredibly blessed and are very fortunate to have had, in the case of someone like Daniel, who we love and we miss, and but having Kyle Olson coming in was incredible timing for that situation, because Kyle has been able to take, as our new lead programmer, take up so much of that and then even beyond in stride, and get us right back on track. And with something like Brad's passing, we're we're also very fortunate, as we've said many times, that his ability to articulate and to pass on kind of his thoughts and his gut and things was very keen. And we also had the foresight many years ago to start sitting down and making sure that these things were documented and recorded, and have been firmly put in place to guide the development. And even though specific things may change here and there, the tenets that ultimately guide what Pantheon is all about, and really the type of game that we hope Pantheon is a forerunner for, and kind of a trendsetter for, to prove that this style of game has a place in modern day gaming, that it doesn't have to just be seen as a throwback, that there really is a way that we want to see a renaissance here of just what MMO gaming can be imagined to be. And so we're just very fortunate in all of these cases to have been able to experience loss and experience change of personnel from different times, and yet never miss a beat. And so I don't want anyone to feel anything but confident in our trajectory and our ability to get where we're going.
Yeah, it was really well said, mate. Thank you. All right, so moving on to gameplay, with abilities in mind, what is our intention for buff progression within each spell or ability line? So kind of single target to group target, etc. Like, how will we set buff duration? How will it scale with level, and how will buff stats scale with level, etc.?
Sure. So buffs will most likely follow a single target to group target progression in many cases, and that's just because we're a grouping game, and I could easily see buffs going from single target to group target earlier and earlier as we go through development, because the reality is buffing is a major part of the game. We want to be able to accentuate players being able not only to buff in groups and bring the measure of what they bring as a class to the table, and be able to do that quickly and efficiently, and not be a huge drain when they need to get all their buffs refreshed, but then also being able to buff strangers and people they run across. And I mean, buffs is just a really iconic part of these games, and so we want them to be meaningful. We want them to be weighty. We want them to be important, even when we factor in, when we look at a character, for example, a character's power progression, and we say, okay, at level 50, what percentage of this character's power is based on gear? What percentage is based on things like buffs? And then what percentage is based on things like stats? And so when I differentiate gear from stats, I'm thinking things like all of the ways that you get attribute gains outside of gear, and conversely, the kind of stats that you gain through gear that aren't directly through attributes. So gear, buffs, and attributes kind of being the three pillars that we look at. And buffs are very significant. We want buffs to be a significant part of that, because again, that factors into how much you feel like as a particular class you're able to bring to the table, and the way you're able to support improving the players around you. So that being said, we want buffs to feel significant, but we don't necessarily want them to feel tedious or cumbersome as part of the gameplay. And so when you're having to single target buff every single person in your group, or certainly in your raid, and you're just spending a ton of mana to do that, and then you've got all this new downtime to sit and kind of build back up, we don't necessarily like that. And so we're going a direction with buffs where the amount of mana that they cost, and the ability to buff more than one player, certainly a group, and even potentially a raid wide buffing that you could grow into, is something we're very, very seriously considering. There's also, as far as durations, that we could do something like naturally scale buffs the higher level you get. Right now we're sitting at around 36 minutes or so for buffs. I could see that most likely going up a little bit as a standard duration to something closer to 45 minutes. As I've seen many of you guys talk about before, like you have to be careful not to make them last too long, and so that you get a buff from a high level and you can run off and play the game for a few hours, and we don't want that happening either. But there's also things we haven't talked about yet, like the Constitution attribute and the plan for Constitution right now. One of the things it will do is actually increase the duration of beneficial buffs on you, as well as decrease the duration of detrimental effects on you. And so the higher your Constitution, the longer your buffs are going to last, and the shorter the debuffs on you are going to last. So that's just a little tidbit there to let you know that we're thinking beyond just flat durations, but actually want to see attributes and stats kind of playing into that as well.
That's awesome. That's definitely a nice little bean. All right, so I've got a class specific one here, so I'm going to skip that because we don't want to break it down to detailed classes just yet. So the next one's gameplay, class balance. Casters with their drop in DPS against higher level mobs always seem to suffer against melee DPS classes when it comes to getting groups. For group appeal, how will VR balance the DPS role between melee and caster types? And we spoke to the Paladin in one of our streams, so they're just asking the caster version of that.
Okay, I need you to repeat that one. Sorry, I was distracted there just for enough of the first part of it.
Oh, good, man. So casters with their drop in DPS against high level mobs always seem to suffer against melee classes. So for group appeal, how will we balance the DPS role between melee versus caster types?
Got it. Okay, so two things. I'll try to make it quick. First of all, like I would like to see us do a better job of balancing that paradigm in general. I don't know that it should be so such a jarring line between spellcasters who are going to just hit a red resist wall as soon as a mob gets 3 or more levels above them, whereas melee classes, they may miss a little bit more, but on the whole they're kind of seeing much better performance. I think where we decide for that kind of line to be, where once a mob is this many levels higher than you, it's kind of a kill wall, basically. Like you're just wherever we design that line to be, and however that line may ebb and flow depending on the player's level. Maybe it's more stark at lower levels than it is at higher levels, kind of thing. I would like to see us do a good job of balancing that holistically across the character types, so that you don't feel that discrepancy. But at the same time, so the wizard, for example, is going to have the different spell schools that they have. There's actually been some evolution to the wizard class a little bit, even since the last time we've talked about it. Most of the classes, actually, you could say that about, and that they're just continuing to evolve and sharpen and kind of get more and more defined as we go. And so the wizard is having this accounted for by building into their class ways to circumvent the typical kind of resist walls that you'll get in certain situations. I'll just say that that extra school of magic that we've referred to may or may not have something to do with that. And the summoner, the interesting thing about the summoner is a lot of their, first of all, they have pets, and those pets are physically based, many of them, in terms of their melee combat. And so you're going to get a mixture of magic and physical DPS from the summoner pets. But then a lot of the summoner nukes are physically based damage as well, because they're actually summoning and hurling physical objects through the air. And so I say that to say I want to see a balance, because we're going to see a lot of different kind of magic types and even some physical type damage from our casters as well. And the more balanced we can make those two things, the better.
Yeah, nice. I know playing as a rogue and also having a caster in other games, the difference for me was like being a melee up close and personal. It's a much higher risk of death because you're right inside the zone of mobs and its reach, drawing aggro, all that kind of stuff. Whereas a caster, you can kind of kite and run around and kind of drop your bombs from a distance without as much risk. But I think that balance is really important, and what you said sounds really good. Alright, so we move on to faction. VR intends that faction will be an ever-present part of the gameplay experience. So how do we intend to keep faction impactful throughout a player's lifetime? And will any faction have hard caps, high, low, or even be fixed in place?
Well, I mean, there'll be a cap on how high you can raise your faction or how low your faction can drop. Yes. And as far as how faction will stay fresh or stay relevant throughout gameplay, I mean, a lot of that is going to be related to our questing content, just the sheer amount of NPCs that you're going to experience moving around the world is going to add a lot of relevance to the faction system because, I think it's just been a little while since a game has done more of the true faction matrix. And when I say what I mean by matrix is like, it's one thing to think of faction in one-dimensionally, like, here's this entity group and everyone kind of starts off neutral or starts off unfriendly or, towards this faction group, and you can either increase or decrease your faction towards that faction group. And that's kind of it versus, like, let's take Black Rose Keep for an example. If I'm a human, if my character's human, then that is going to affect how the denizens of Black Rose Keep view me because of their unique relationship to Thronefast. If I'm a human paladin, let's say, then they may dislike me even more because of what they may perceive paladins of Thronefast to be like. Whereas if I'm a human rogue, they may not care for me because I'm a Thronefastian human, but they may see my rogue, that I'm a rogue, and kind of gain back a little bit of, positive faction towards me. So a human paladin, they might, be kind of dubious towards, whereas a human rogue, they might be indifferent. Whereas a halfling, they may have no feelings towards halflings, one way or the other. And so if I'm a halfling rogue, they may actually kind of like me a little bit because my race isn't affecting anything and my class is giving me a bonus. But then beyond that, I may be, I'll just use this as an example. In EverQuest, we're all familiar with like Castle Mistmore and Mayong Mistmore kind of being that iconic figure from that zone. And one of the things I always thought was really intriguing, I was actually talking to Jay and Gerhardt today, our lead writer, about this, because we were talking about factions today. And I was saying, one of the things that was really cool was I could be all the way in Freeport or Kinos. I think that's how supposedly it's supposed to be said. I say Kanos, but what does it matter? I could be all the way in Kanos, and I could, let's say I'm on a necromancer or something, that I'm there and I'm just kind of, having a good old time taking out some of the citizens of the city, and I take down, what looks like just kind of an ordinary citizen, and all of a sudden my faction with Mayong Mistmore goes down. And it's like, what in the world? What is this? Like, what's the connection between this random seeming civilian and this human city all the way, on a different continent, and this like sinister, lord of this keep? Like, that's crazy. That's what in the world's going on there. So we were talking about how kind of those micro stories get told through faction, and that it's been a while since, you've seen a kind of faction matrix like that, where not only is your race and your class and things like that factoring in, but it's also like there's so much interconnectivity based on lore and the story and these kind of micro stories and connections that are woven all throughout the world. And so it makes the denizens of Terminus have so much more depth, and even just just that alone is a way to tell story and immerse players in the game world. So hopefully that speaks to a little bit of what that question is after.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, so we've got about 3 or 4 quick-fire questions here. So, combat resources. Will accumulated combat resources naturally deplete over time, both in and out of combat?
Yes, they will. They will deplete over time in and out of combat at different rates, usually more slowly in combat than they do out of combat, but yes.
Awesome. Banking. Is the intent still to have regional/local banks and or markets?
Yeah, the plan right now is to approach those regionally. Yep.
Awesome, man. Raid size. Have we finalised raid size caps yet? And is raid content being developed with caps in mind?
Yes, raid content is being developed with 12, 24, and 40 person caps in mind.
Beautiful. Class balance in roles. So this is a little bit bigger, but I think we touched on it earlier. Each class in a role has designedly different strengths and weaknesses. So how will we ensure the non-optimal group choice is acceptable without negating the need for others in the role? So I think basically, everyone thinks you need a rogue for this because they go highest DPS, or you need to bring a sork for this. Like, if you don't have one of those available, how is a non-optimal group going to still cope?
Well, I mean, it seems to me that it's important to define what we mean by non-optimal versus like non-viable. There's a big difference between, this class is not the absolute top to bottom best solution for this versus it's impossible to do this without this class. And we don't ever want to be in a situation where it's impossible to accomplish something without class A. But it's okay if there are classes that in certain situations are not optimal. So the simplest way to answer that question without getting into the weeds on it would be we are very comfortable with classes for the sake of identity, for the sake of distinction, and classes having their own, fortes and their strengths and, to a degree, their weaknesses. We are very much okay with some classes being optimal in certain situations and some classes being less optimal. But we're not okay with certain classes being viable and certain classes not being viable.
Yeah, cool. You need to, I get what you mean. That's good. Alright, so this one is... I'm going to skip the 2 raid ones. It's on loot by class and raid bosses, but we're not really up to that kind of stuff yet. It's a little bit too technical to where we are. We will get to those, but I think that'll be a little bit later in development. So we'll skip to server pop. Are you pre-calculating optimal zone population? If so, how? Will you be able to adjust population density dynamically? So it's a little bit technical. I don't think we can say how. Just I can hear Molad distant whisper in my ear saying, "Don't talk about that." But are we keeping optimal zone population in check at the moment, or are we thinking about that?
Yeah, we're definitely thinking about that, and I think keeping with the theme of saying things as simply as possible. It's not going to be a tech limitation. It's not going to be a server limitation or a hardware limitation, or it's not going to be a limitation on that side. It's going to be decisions that we're making based on the health of the game content. So just because we can have this many players in a zone at once and this many players on a server at once doesn't mean that that's good for the actual health of the content. So that's all I'll say about that now. It's something that we'll be, watching as we get into upcoming testing sessions and then move into alpha and eventually beta. More and more critical mass. We'll be keeping an eye on, the content churn and the bottlenecks and, where it seems like server population and content stability starts to kind of reach that tipping point, and we'll be able to make decisions from there.
Yeah, perfect. I think we have spoken about this before too, and had said we want the world to feel lived in but not overcrowded, and we want the performance of the server to be healthy and not, stressed. So we'll find that nice balance when we get into bigger testing like alpha and beta. Alright, so spawn timers, and just quickly, I sent a few questions in there. This has been recorded, so we'll pop this up for VIPs and champions. As soon as this is done, I will start uploading that, and then a week later I release it to everybody else as well. So if you can't listen to the whole one now, you can go and find those on our YouTube channel. Alright, so we've got spawn timers. What is the current thinking for mob spawns for regular, named, and raid? Is there, for example, fixed or variable, and do we have anything that we can talk about?
I'm a fan of spawn times if we're just talking regular content and not raid targets. I'm a fan of varied spawn timers by zone. Where you've got some zones that have let's say like a 6-minute spawn time, some zones an 18-minute or 22-minute, something like that. I think certainly based on whether it's an overland zone versus a dungeon zone, I think that distinction alone will go a long way towards determining respawn times. But then certainly you've got named mob considerations, which it may be that named mobs have their own unique spawn time, but I tend to think that placeholder approach where you've got a chance that a named mob can spawn, and there's a placeholder or maybe two that could also spawn, is a relatively good system. I mean, but then also there being exceptions to that, where maybe then you want the named to spawn every time, or maybe there are no placeholders and the named spawn is a really rare chance, but it has that chance, every 6 minutes or every 22 minutes or whatever, based on what the zone is kind of governing. But I think that kind of tried and true approach is a good one, but we also kind of are fans of establishing rules and then breaking them creatively. So I think we'll probably end up with a mixture of what I've described and then some wild card type stuff.
Perfect. That sounds good, man. All right, so another couple of quick fire questions. When can we realistically expect to see full Scar and Dark Mirror models?
Yeah, so we talked about this yesterday in the dev stream, and we are working on getting those models playable. But I'd love to see us here in the next maybe the next dev stream, maybe the one after that would be great to get at least some screenshots up of where those ended up, and then hopefully just as we've prioritized everything, there are definitely some things that are more prime directives at the moment, but getting those new models rigged and then getting their animations hooked up and getting them in is something we also really are excited about internally. So we'll be getting it as soon as we can.
Good stuff. All right, a couple of quick fire on starting cities. So we've seen a few maps of Terminus. Are there still to be 9 starter cities?
Yes, that is something very, very near and dear. And while they may not all be cities, they all need to have their unique starting area with enough of that footprint there to really establish their identity and their starting place in the world. Yes.
Nice. And I've got questions of how will they be placed and the travel time between them, but I don't think we can realistically answer those. But we can answer, will players starting at different cities be able to play together on launch day?
If you guys make a plan to meet up somewhere, then yes, absolutely. Will there be quick travel options to get from one starting area to the next? That's not our path at the moment.
Okay, perfect. So gameplay competition. Could you provide an overview of how you view competition fitting into the spirit of the game for the world you are building? So this was a massive topic back in October. So will kill credit be handled using first to engage or most damage done? So first to engage, like Vanguard, if you tag it first, it's your mob, or most damage done. So if you tag it, someone drops some bombs on it in EQ, then you get the kill for it and the other person misses out. How are we thinking about handling that for competition?
Okay, so the plan right now is that kill credit will be based on a most damage done system, where the person who does the most damage to a target will take credit for that target and get the loot rights for that target. However, the distinction to make, and this is something that most of we've been talking about and thinking about quite a bit, but the distinction to make is when it comes to raiding. And so what I want to say on this roundtable is that the plan right now for raids is that raid targets will be first to encounter. Credit will apply to the entirety of the raid force that the first to encounter player is within. And so once a raid target is tagged, only the members of the tagging raid force are going to be able to inflict damage on the raid target. It will be locked to the raid force that is first to encounter. And like we talked about earlier, a raid force is going to consist of up to 40 players. Each raid target is going to be tuned for a raid force of either 12, 24, or 40 players. And where we would kind of go from there is to say, if a 40-person raid force tags a raid target that is intended for a 24-person raid, then that target is going to scale in difficulty in proportion to the number of raid force members that exceeds its intended size. So when we say we're designing these raids for 12 or 24 or 40-person raids, we're doing first to encounter for raid targets. And if you get 40 people, a 40-person raid target showing, or raid force showing up to a 12 size, a 12-person raid force or 24-person raid force target, then you're going to see that target scale dramatically based on the number of additional people in that raid force that show up.
Nice.
Yep.
They're questioning the 40 number. So 12, 24, 48, or 42 would be basically in groups of 6. So they're questioning that 40. Would it be a 42 or 48 instead for raid size?
Well, it's kind of like 36-person, but with the kind of the ability to have an additional 1, 2, 3, 4 people that can show up and fill in some gaps. So I actually tend to think of it more as in 12, 24, and 36, but I like 40 because it just gives a little bit of extra breathing room. And you could say, well, why not just bump it up to another full group? But that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Yeah, cool. And a lot of that will go into testing as well to see how those numbers kind of turn out, see how these guys handle it and what they can do with it. So I'm going to skip that one. We're going to go to tenants. Does the Pantheon difference page still reflect the features that will set Pantheon apart from other MMOs?
Sorry, Kilsin, you cut out on that one just a little bit. What was the question?
Sorry, man. The game tenants. Does the Pantheon difference page on our website still reflect the features that will set Pantheon apart from other MMOs?
Yeah, I think it would be good for us to go and kind of do another pass on those and refine those a little bit. I would say that they all absolutely still hold true, but I think just that's such an important aspect of the game and kind of our what we're putting forward is what Pantheon's about, that I think it's worthy of being reflected on and updated and refined as we go along, and probably several more times. But that's really more in the specifics. It's not that any one of those items needs to be removed or changed or anything like that. This is this is still definitely the heart of what we're making. Those tenets govern the kind of game we're making, and so it's really just the specifics as they evolve internally, as we get more and more of those things implemented, and then I think we can sharpen up that messaging as we move along.
Yes, sweet. Okay, so we're going to skip a couple of these that have already been answered in other questions. And we'll move on to... So we've got pledges. Is there any update regarding the idea of a possible guild pledge? I can talk to you from a CM and CS point of view that we are looking at updates and how we can expand on the pledges. Like we are a crowd-funded game, so while we're not in dire straits, we still also haven't been fully funded, so that is our main source of revenue, and we are always looking at ways at how we can continue that flow coming in to help with development. So that is something that we continually review, and I'm not going to say no, there isn't a chance of a guild pledge, but I think it may be a little bit too early while we're in these early stages of pre-alpha. But I think there's a good possibility that there could be one, in future testing phases. So gameplay. Will there be a meaningful deity system? And could you describe how it might look?
Yes, there will, but it is a pretty profound system. Profound in the sense of it's a very big system. It touches on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And it's something we are excited to share and has been cooking for a while. And now's just not the time. But it is it's called Pantheon for a reason. And I will say this, that one of the things that has always been a goal, because Pantheon is a tab-targeted game, we've always wanted to experiment, and you can see some of this in some of the class design. Experiment with what it would feel like to have some more... And you can give me the benefit of the doubt when I say it this way, but some more action-based elements, meaning, whether it's like the ranger's silent arrow that's manually aimed, or some of what we've talked about with like mana shield for the summoner, and how it's this very short duration mana shield that is meant to kind of absorb incoming damage to a great degree, similar to the warrior's shield block in a way. But the fact that some of our projectiles will actually be aimed as well, and you're going to be hit only if you're standing in the path of that projectile, as opposed to it being like a homing missile. It's obviously, we are a tab-targeted game. We are not ever going in the direction of an action-based game by any means, but being able to have some more of these types of abilities and types of moments where you can actually aim something, or you are needing to avoid something that is going to strike you based on actual collision, and you're being in the path of it, as opposed to it just is a fire and forget, because it's going to find you wherever you go, as long as you're in range for the cast. And so this I know it kind of sounds like the kind of a weird place to get into when we're talking about pantheons, but trust me that it's very much related, and we will be able to share a little bit more information about that as soon as it's all kind of ready to be put out there in its fullness. For sure, yeah. I mean, we have all of those options available to us to explore. So I think the first place that we really are kind of interested in looking at when it comes to PvP is what kind of servers we can create that are dedicated to PvP with their own specific rule sets. That being said, there are some additional guild-related PvP content we're considering. The ability to take something like / Guild War and evolve that is really intriguing. And I think there's some really cool things we can do with that, and perhaps even certain zones that could be eventually dedicated to things like that. Really, there's no limit to what we can do and what we can explore. But I think taking a look at server rule sets, taking a look at guild v guild type stuff are the two most intriguing places that we're trending towards looking at first.
Yeah, nice. And just for those questioning, like, it won't have any impact on PvE at all. It'll be a separate kind of thing. If it's on a server PvE, you would have to willingly choose to go into that zone and engage it where it would be PvP only style. So it's not going to impact you guys at all. So gameplay, just quickly on this one, because I know disposition is a pretty big subject, but will the disposition system affect major boss fights? And could this provide variation for them? And can we give an example?
So yes, dispositions. The dispositions are the name that we've given to the chance that any regular mob could spawn with a particular disposition that would change the way that it behaves and give it pretty significant variation or deviations from its normal expression. And what we've done is we've taken that concept of dispositions and we've kind of designed through what would that look like on bosses as well, because the same rule applies to bosses. I mean, we want to avoid Groundhog's Day in dungeons just as much as we want to we want to create opportunities for boss fights to also be have the chance to be unexpected in how they go and what they're like. And so for bosses, we call it a manifestation instead of a disposition. And we do that to differentiate them because there are some differences between them. It's a boss, and so what its manifestation could allow it to do is going to be that much bigger and crazier in some cases. And so it is the disposition. It's just expanded and evolved, and even greater in terms of its potential effect on the behavior and the way things will go, because it's a boss. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Nice. Okay, so just on the world quickly. So far, the Atlas shows 2 continents. Are 3, including White Thor, still planned for launch? And if not, what would that mean for the races that would live there?
There are still the 3 continents planned for launch, and the starting areas for the 9 different races will be where they are intended to be. So you'll have the dwarves, the Archai, and the gnomes. In the Whitethall region, you'll have the Dark Myr, the Scar, and the ogres in the Rainfall region, and the humans and the elves and the halflings in the King's Reach region.
Nice. Okay, so community. Pantheon's content creators work to both engage the public and promote the game. Are there any plans for an updated fan kit or other tools to help them? Yes, there definitely is. Ben and myself and David are looking at ways to update that, and we have got, with the new logo and branding and stuff, we have started work on it. I don't have a timeline for the release of that, but once it is ready, I will be the first to let you guys know, and I'll reach out to the fan sites as well, because I know a few of you have already shown interest. Okay, so community again. Can you clarify the type of gamer that makes the target audience you seek to attract? And what message do you have for those who feel like an outsider for not having played EQ1? Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah, what was the first part of the question there?
So, can we clarify the type of gamer that makes the target audience we seek to attract? So, who are we going for? What's our target audience?
Gotcha. Yeah, this is a great question, though, because, like I said earlier, this VR was founded on the principle that the games that we would say we are a spiritual successor of represent a kind of game that is, we believe, just as relevant today as it was then. And while we are making steps towards making Pantheon more accessible in certain ways, there are certain tediums and certain challenges and just some refinements that are relatively easy to make, that don't sacrifice the spirit of the game by any means, but just make it more accessible to the modern player. And I would say things like, for example, our core time frame, like we want you to feel like you can accomplish something meaningful in a couple hours, and that's something that's governing how we do things. Not that there's not going to be depth and plenty of opportunity for people who want to play exponentially more and longer than that in a single playtime. I mean, obviously that's going to happen, and that's good, that's fine. There's a variety of people, but I think the accessibility that we're going to provide for that kind of onboarding experience, players coming in, they're going to find it much easier to to get groups. We're not going to handhold there. We're not going to ever have like a group finder or a dungeon finder rather. That's going to instantaneously move you around the world from here to there and all that. But we're going to be doing things that facilitate players connecting and finding other players that they can play with, and while still maintaining the importance of social interaction and community and all that too. But again, the point here is that it's about the challenge. It's about the this kind of open world, socially charged, shared experience of being immersed in a world that is not linear by design. It's not handholdy in how it moves you around. It's based on a robust faction system with robust storytelling and very, very strong class identity, character identity, and all for the purpose of bringing players together to share these experiences, to build social contracts, to make friends, to make enemies, to be who you want to be in this kind of intensely challenging game world that is not forgiving but is very rewarding. And I think that's going to be a big part of what is going to resonate with hopefully new audiences as well as the core audience we have, because again, I think it's a very, very good time. It's a unique time right now with nothing really like this available. And I think, I mean, it's a very kind of intrepid thing that we're doing here. I mean, you say open world, not instance, and that alone is, carving out a path that is even though it's been done before, it still feels a little bit trailblazy in the current market of things, because it's just not something that you see, and yet it is a door to a kind of gameplay experience that is so significant and so meaningful that we're really excited to capture. So that target audience is the person who they love high adventure. They love the notion of real discovery. They love the concept of overcoming challenges through robust acquisition of items and abilities, and a very strong character growth and power growth premise. And they love kind of blazing into their own trail, where they're not following a predetermined path or just kind of eyes on a mini map 75% of the time, but really just setting off. And that's the kind of experience we want to capture, and what we're hoping will resonate with a lot more people.
Nice, man. We've got Sacred late to the channel and asking a couple of questions that seem very important. So, are they on exact timers for raid bosses? And we've said that they're not. And also, can you FD a raid boss?
Can you FD a raid boss?
Like
most likely not. Most likely not. These bosses will be able to see through a lot of that kind of trickery. And I meant to say this earlier too, but the first to encounter, I think first to encounter solves a lot of things, but not if you're able to tag with a single person. I think there's something to be said about guilds, being in a certain place. It's not. There's going to be probably a predetermined area around a raid target where a first to encounter attempt can begin setting up, and then whether it's in the form of a race or whatever it ends up being, and guilds, whether we consider something like a lockout where if you are the guild to tag that target, then maybe you have to sit out the next spawn, and then it kind of resets the spawn after that. Maybe not. But what I'm hoping to see is that guilds will work out some kind of an agreement to a degree with who's going to tag when, and that will be dependent though on respawn time. So if it's crazy long respawn time, then I don't think guilds will feel a whole lot of impetus trying to strike an agreement because of how long they have to wait. So, but the key is first to encounter is going to solve a lot of things for us and for you guys in a lot of ways, but it can't just be like, I've got my rogue camped here, I've got my ranger camped here, and as soon as the thing spawns, I'm spamming hotkeys. There really needs to be more of a raid force that's accumulated, and that first to encounter will most likely only be registered if there's enough of that particular raid force there and present. So I just don't want to see a single character tagging the boss and then kiting it around while the guild musters and gets there. You need to be there. You need to be generally set up, prepared, ready to go, and then when you've got enough people there to tag, then you tag and you're on your way.
Sweet. So we've got about 5 minutes left, but we've only got about 9 questions left. So I'm pretty sure we can run a little bit over if that's all right with you and get through these last ones. I didn't realize how well we were going. I didn't think we'd make this anywhere close, but we're doing really well. Alright, so gear. While VR's stance for gear is to scale down item power based on the wielder's level, some in the community suggest that gear level requirements would be a better fit for Pantheon. What is the current thinking?
Yeah, I mean, this didn't we talk about this one time recently? Like, there is this kind of there's something to me that I feel like you lose when you put gear behind a level requirement. I think no drop covers a lot. It allows for things that just are absolutely game breaking. If this were passed down, this level of power were passed down, then you've got no drop to cover that. But aside from that, like we've always said, like, twinking is not a bad word. Like, that is a significant part of the game, and especially when you start to these are things that you've earned, and then to say that you can't take these things that you have earned and pass them down to characters that you're going to make after that. There's a way of looking at more like this is kind of your property. And so especially when you start thinking of things like progeny and the way that can make the idea of re-rolling and having alts and stuff even more robust, there is something to be said about the ability to pass items down and not have them locked to requirements. Now, like soft caps, like a recommended level, something like that. I mean, we're kind of already doing that with things like weapon skill and proficiencies, things like that. Even armor proficiency, and the way that will govern how much armor proficiency being like a skill that the character actually has that increases as they level, and that armor proficiency will govern how much benefit from the item you're actually able to get. And that's a knob that we can tune as needed. But I just don't think we're going to need something like a no drop mechanic and a required level or recommended level scaling mechanic.
Yeah,
that's just remains our stance at the moment.
Good stuff, man. I think that's a very good stance to have. So, very quickly, race versus class. Gnomes, for example, lack a tank class. So when gnomes level up at the start, will a tank not be necessary? Will they group up with other races? Will summoner pets be the tank, etc.? I think because we've already explained there'll be 3 races kind of in the same area, there will be means for tanks to group up.
Definitely, and especially with the gnomes, they kind of have this. It's not like a symbiotic relationship, but Skyhold is the actual like ship. The Skyhold vessel is anchored in Kadasa, like not in the city of Kadasa, but in that zone. So the gnomes, particularly, will pretty much be sharing that starting area with the dwarves, so they'll have plenty of help.
Perfect. All right, so there's a couple of economy questions here which we haven't kind of touched on. Does VR still plan to use systems like sacrificing items for long-term buffs to encourage players to take items out of the economy? And then there's a second one. Will there be an in-game mail system to send items or money to other players through mailboxes in, say, cities and towns?
So we are not going to do the item sacrificing thing for long-term buffs. We're not going to do it that way. We're still considering that idea, and in that it has some potential impact with the progeny system and ways that could be a means of advancing that system or kind of investing in that system a little bit.
Nice. That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, that's about all I can say there. And then I'm going to throw the mailboxes and that question into the general kind of economy and banks and some things that we're going to wait and speak more definitively to that once we get a little further down the road.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so here's another one for you. Good one too, we haven't had for a while. We know you're heavily into music. Do you still make music for Pantheon? And are there new clips, teasers, songs? Also, have you decided on the theme song, loading song, etc.?
I have not written any music for Pantheon since I think one of the last things I did was the it was around that little hole in Halnir Cave area where you can look through that little opening in the wall there, and there were a couple of other pieces around that same time frame. But yeah, I have not, and no, we haven't really settled on anything musically. I mean, even the music that I've composed so far, I would love to see those pieces kind of touched up a little bit, and once it's pretty much settled that we're going to be looking for a composer that probably a principal composer who can really take the reins on the more thematic pieces for the game, and then potentially an additional composer who would be filling out just the myriad of music that makes these MMOs what they are. And then whenever that principal composer is found and gets rolling, then we'll probably revisit a lot of those tracks that I've written and see how we may want to make those more robust, or potentially derive some themes out of those that we can circulate through other parts of the game's soundtrack. But I am 100% okay and very, very happy and excited about a composer who can come on and be 100% dedicated to that role. And I mean, to be clear, we're not looking for a composer right now. But when the time comes, that's the plan, is that it would be an extremely passionate person who is able to give it their 100% attention.
Perfect. Someone that gets Joppa's approval, of course. So,
yeah.
So with another touch on raids, in MMOs, raids in MMOs often end in wipes. So what is VR's approach to how teams reform afterwards? Will we see like mountains of uncollected corpses, lengthy travel from save stones, or utility spells items to facilitate this?
Well, there will definitely be utility spells and items that can alleviate some of that, either through things like resurrection, obviously evacuate spells, or when players are able to teleport and move large portions of the raid force from one location to another more quickly. But I mean, other than that, a big part of what makes raiding, at least in Pantheon's context, is that part of the challenge is in the tension of failure and wiping and death, and the recovery that takes place from that is part of the full equation. So when you don't have that inherent risk, then you tend to get a much more kind of frantic raiding scene, because there's if recovery is mitigated heavily through just these instantaneous or fast track means of getting back and keeping going, not only do you potentially promote guilds being able to throw waves at it, and when the first wave goes down, the second wave goes in while the first recovers, and then the third wave goes while this but you also just get a lot more what I would think of as unhealthy or unhelpful competition, because it's more just noise, as opposed to knowing that we're first to encounter, but we also need to make sure that we make this count, because if we wipe, then we have a whole recovery process to go through, and most likely the guild who's on deck waiting is just gonna take it. So that's all I'll say about that for now.
Good stuff. That risk versus reward needs to be there. People need to be scared of dying, so make it all worthwhile and put a meaningful attempt into building properly, and that whole competition and socialization, and that all kind of falls into place. So, communication. VR says it wants to do more in terms of when and how it communicates with the community. What can the VIPs and public expect?
Was that before we started doing the bi-weekly streams? Was that?
Yes, it was. I was about to say.
There you go.
So we've stepped that up with, obviously, we've got the dev roundtables every month. Now they're starting back up again. These will be a monthly thing again. We just had that period over, sadly, the passing of Brad, and then going into the Christmas and New Year periods where we had a lot going on and people on holidays and stuff like that. Now we're back into the full swing, so I will be hosting these every month again at the end of the month, same time, with a different developer, going through different topics. And we've also got the bi-weekly streams with Ben and Dave, and guests, and plus we will continue to have normal streams and whatnot in association with the forums and Discord and social media. But yeah, we're always looking at ways of how we can improve that further. As we go into different development stages, that will increase as well, with more content that we have to release and more things that we roll out for you guys. Alright, can you give us an insight into, so this is development timeline. There's 3 more questions left. Can you give us an insight into the current stage and focus and whether things are on track?
Yes, I would say things definitely are on track. The current stage and focus is Project Fairtale. And, Project Fairtale seems to be interpreted or defined by a lot of people in the community as a particular zone or something relatively small in scope in that sense, and that's probably in part due to some of our messaging and whatnot. But Project Fairtale is bigger than that. It's I don't want to go into too much here right now, but it's as much about the areas of the world that we're working on and bringing online as much as it is about the gameplay systems and really the loop. And that's kind of how I describe it internally, and what I feel like daily I'm using that phrase as we're having different meetings. And because what Pantheon has lacked for some time is that gameplay loop, where when you're looking forward to a game coming out and you want to take a look at it, if you're like me, you'll get on YouTube and you'll type in so and so gameplay, such and such gameplay. And because what you're looking for is, what does it look like to play the game? What does it feel like to play the game when everything is there and working and the systems are there, and there's a game that has all of this stuff that's natively built in, and so the game is just being played. What is it like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Is it fun? Does it make me want to play it? And that's the clearest, most like fundamental thing that Project Fairtale is about, is achieving that gameplay loop where Pantheon is able to speak for itself completely. Now, does that mean that, when we're ready to start, kind of showing these things, that it also means it's going to come with that kind of launch level of polish and quality? Probably not across the board. But the point again is that it would be referentially, in some cases, along with, a good portion that is much closer to a finished final quality and polish, that it would be referentially enough that you would be able to see and fundamentally understand and experience, even vicariously, what it looks like and feels like to play Pantheon. So are we on track to achieve that? Absolutely we are. And even as we're forecasting out over the next little bit, looking towards pre-alpha 5, looking towards ultimately moving into alpha, I feel better than I even expected I would, in terms of where we're at and where we're going to be able to get by certain milestones. And so I'm feeling really good about that. But I just want to make sure that that's clear, that it's just as much about the world being developed and more of the world being brought online and connected, and as it is about really achieving that gameplay loop. And at the center of that gameplay loop really is progression. And I think that's really the key, is what does it look like to play Pantheon when you're not, put in this zone at, a high level with all your abilities kind of, already put on the bar for you, and you're just kind of diving right in. But what does it look like to actually start here, maybe at level 1, maybe at level 10, 20, whatever it may be, and actually progress from here to there? And what are the zones that I move through to do that? What are the abilities that I gain? What's the equipment that I gain? What's the item acquisition mechanics and systems? What does it look like to make money? How do you make money? What are you spending money on when you make money? What are the places that player trade is becoming important? What are the things that players tend to start valuing, and how do they acquire that? And then how do they give that to each other? What are the trading hubs that pop up automatically? How challenging is this level stuff compared to that level stuff? And at what level can I start to attempt these things, or what level can a full group start to attempt that stuff? And if I'm trying to get to this zone, but I can't, get high enough level, here to get there, where else can I go to, continue to get experience and get higher and higher level. How are my abilities being acquired? What does it feel like to be able to buy some ability scrolls from a vendor, but then also have a good portion of abilities I don't have yet because I've not found them yet in the world. They've not dropped for me yet, or I haven't found that NPC that I need to talk to, and it just goes on and on and on. When these things are all like moving as one whole, then that's what Project Fairthale is about, getting us to that point. And so, yes, we are very much on track and super excited.
Yeah, Project Fairthale is massive. It's not just one thing or zone. It's encompassing everything you can think of within gameplay to be, as feature complete as possible. It's a huge deal, and we're kicking butt and taking names, and we're a fair chunk through that. We're doing really well. So we want to... so 2 more questions. Development timeline. After Project Fairthale and the subsequent pre-alpha testing, where will VR focus next? So what are I know it's a long way to kind of think past that, but what are our thoughts after Project Fairthale and PA testing?
Definitely alpha. That would be our next, and everything that we're doing now too, Project Fairthale, moving towards pre-alpha 5, all of those things are fundamental to the road to alpha. And so it will be natural just to continue to look towards getting to alpha.
Yeah, sweet. Fair chunk, define fair chunk. Big slice, large portion. Anything I can say that doesn't give a definitive.
A fair chunk.
So, last question. Streamer program. Are there any updates on the streamer program? That would be a question for Ben Dean. I working closely with Ben, I don't think there are any updates on that just yet, but it is still something he is very much passionate about, and it is in his forethought. It's just, we kind of switch focus to getting Project Fairthale ready, doing the bi-weekly streams, getting a bit more of that kind of content out there first, and then when the game's more stable and balanced and we have a little bit more content, then the streamer program will start to kind of roll in, and he will kind of kick that off, and we'll announce it to you when that's ready. Again, I'm sorry I don't have a time for that, but yeah, I don't have any updates at that moment to share. And that was the very last question. I don't know how we got from 14 through to 54, but we did it. We only skipped a couple that were repeats. So, very well done, mate. That was a good effort.
Nice.
Lots of good information given. I think...
Great questions.
They were fantastic questions. So I think we can hang around for a little bit if you guys want. If you want to do some off-the-cuff kind of live questions, things that we haven't already covered. And we'll try to give you as much info as we can in a short time possible. Hang around for another few minutes. But as for the roundtable listed questions, they're all done. If you have any more on those, you can go to the thread that I posted and post the questions in there, and Joppa and myself will kind of look over them. If there's any new ones in there that require answering, I'll ping Joppa and we can have a look and write that answer out for you. But until then, do you guys have anything you want to ask or talk about? If you can just tag at Joppa or at Kilsin, just so we can see it highlighted for those questions too, please. So what is the biggest thing that we as individuals or even as a community can do to help VR, help Pantheon become a reality? So that's a fantastic question. I think it's got a couple of parts to it as well. And from a CM community side of things, word of mouth is one of the biggest things you can possibly do to help us to get the word out there to as many people as possible. So if we can get eyes on, and obviously we're crowdfunded, as I said earlier, so pledges basically the driving force behind our funding at the moment until we get full funding. So pledges and revenue in that nature are incredibly helpful. They go directly to development of the game, and basically have funded us from the beginning all the way up to this stage and beyond. So pledges and word of mouth are kind of the two biggest things that can help us with funding and to grow the community. We want community matters is an important hashtag that we are truly behind and we truly believe, and we want to continue to grow our community to be bigger and better. And I think that's pretty much it at this stage. We don't want to kind of spread out too much with funding and kind of push our limits. We know what you guys like and don't like, and we're always reviewing ideas and options to see where we can continue to grow that. But for now, it's pledges and word of mouth, telling your friends and family and people you meet in game that haven't heard about us, without kind of spamming them or annoying them. We can just get our name out there so they can get eyes on it and come and check us out.
The only thing I would add to that is to please continue to be vocal. As vocal, I really don't care how it's delivered. I don't care if it's criticism. I don't care if it's how it's phrased. I don't want to encourage anything that might be offensive or not taken well by other people. But the bottom line is that we want Pantheon to be successful. We want it to be a great game, and we need feedback. We need vocal people. And I'm not saying that as you guys aren't doing a good enough job with that. I guess I'm saying it more to don't grow weary of doing it. Don't think that we're not listening or that we don't take these things into account when we come forward, as we want to do a better job of saying things more definitively as often as we can. Don't shy away from saying I hate that idea. That's awful. But here's why I don't like it. Here's why I think it should be different, because it doesn't mean that it's going to change the plan, but there's a much better chance that a plan could change if you guys are being vocal and you're being you're putting some time into explaining why it is that it's not just a kind of a quick gut reaction I really don't like that. That's fair and that's fine, but it doesn't help us understand kind of the fundamentals of why is it that you don't like that. And there's several members of the community I think that do a really good job and would be a really good example of this is just the kind of feedback that's really helpful. So anyway, that's just absolutely. Be vocal and do your best to be patient because we are doing absolutely the best we can. We want to get this game to you guys, so please know that we are on track. We're fired up. We're moving forward, and I know it's hard, but be patient. The day's going to come. It's going to come. So be patient.
The constructive feedback and criticism is massive. I've been saying this ever since Joppa. I just passed my 5-year anniversary, and I look back on a post where Joppa actually handed the reins over to me as a little apprentice CM back in the day, which was an amazing, feeling for me to come from the community to then take over and be the person that sat on the fence and was the chief liaison was amazing. And to grow into that position and learn along the way everything that I have has been fantastic. And I've never stopped listening to you guys. Everything you write, good and bad, I read, I take on board, and I pass to the appropriate developers. I link them to your comments. I try to, if it's not worded properly, I try to break it down so they will understand it better, and vice versa. If there's something you guys get upset about, I talk to the developers and go straight to the horse's mouth. I find out why we're doing this, how it's going to work, and then I will then break that down and reply back to you guys in a way that you will understand. And so that, I don't think that has been, one of the biggest benefits of our community over the last 5 years is having that constructive criticism and having that passion. And I know it does get emotional sometimes, and you'll see something you didn't like in another game and go, oh, that's it, the game's screwed. I don't want to play this anymore. That's a deal breaker for me. But without telling us why it was so bad and taking the emotion out of it and kind of explaining to us why it was bad and explaining how you think it'll be better, it makes it very hard to guess when multiple people do that. We don't know what you're thinking or what your experience was if we hadn't experienced it ourselves. So to have that detail in there is really important. But please continue that, because that's something that I actually love going through and reading from you guys is all your ideas and constructive criticism and feedback and positives and negatives and all that stuff. But as long as there's a lot of detail in there and it's constructive, please keep that coming.
Yeah. Well said, and I totally vouch for how well of a job Kilsin has done and continues to do with that. So I know that you guys are in good hands. It's not an easy job at all, and
No.
he handles it very, very well.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, so will armor look different for each race? Like, will bronze armor have a different appearance on a dark mirror as they would on a halfling? Race specific armor appearance like EQ1.
So one of the first kind of reality checks I remember as a developer was how easy it is to want things to be a certain way, and the cost of actually getting things to be a certain way when it comes to what it actually requires to make armor, and to make armor that fits on multiple different races. So unfortunately, one of my favorite things from EverQuest, I remember, because how old was I? I think I remember I was going into 9th grade, I think, when EverQuest launched, and I was like right there at kind of 99, so that definitely dates me. But one of the things I remember really resonating was that very thing, that armor was unique for the race, and it was one of my most favorite things. And unfortunately, we're not planning to do that because of just the resource cost. Because every time you create an armor, a full suit of armor, even just a piece of gear, you have to create it with 9 different looks in mind, and it's something that we can't justify the bang for buck. Now, what we are not compromising on, and one of the things actually that I didn't personally play Vanguard very much. I played for probably 2 or 3 months total, and did a lot of beta testing leading up to launch. But one of the things that really made it hard for me to get into Vanguard was the unibody approach. And again, I totally get why they made that decision developmentally, but it fundamentally made it difficult for me. And I know some people, I'm laughing because Sacred, for example, I'm like, I don't think he would care. I don't think he'd care less about this kind of stuff. And just not even at all. But for me, that was a really big deal. And so that's one reason why in Pantheon we've really pushed for that unique silhouette as much as we've been able to do, while also being able to retain the ability to make armor and refit that armor as easily as possible for the different races. So again, and I don't want to go too long on this, but yeah, no plans to do that, even though I totally get it and wish we could. Yeah, so I mean, obviously the crafting system, the harvesting, and that whole sphere, and the perception system as well as its whole sphere. So you're going to have those 2 additional spheres of gameplay to potentially choose from. But there's also going to be, just as there's money sinks in game, there's also going to be progression sinks as well. And an example would be the ability modification and ability upgrade system we talked about yesterday, where just because you reach max level doesn't mean you're going to be finished or even anywhere close to finished upgrading your abilities. And so that's going to give you kind of a whole a lot of things to continue working on about your character and progressing your character forward. And the ability upgrades are only one piece of how you're going to be able to kind of carry on that advancement. It's that alternate advancement spirit, and I think it's one of just those ingenious ideas that EQ did, that added, and I know that not everyone feels this way, but it really added something very, very special to that game, and I want to capture that spirit in as many ways as we can. The ability system is one, even if it's the kind of thing where we're going to be taking a look at the character sheet and the inventory and things like that here soon, and I want to do another pass on the equipment slots, because we want to look at things like in addition to the glyphs for the acclamation, having a few additional character slots for acclamation specific gear that you can actually equip, because the acclamation is handled through multiple layers, not just glyphs. It's also gear and buffs and things like that. But then there's the opportunity to introduce something like a charm or an amulet or a sigil or a relic, or an item that as an item can also be evolved multiple times as you progress by maybe it's something as simple as having to find the right ingredients and taking that charm, let's call it a charm, taking that charm and those ingredients, putting it in a special container, combining it, and boom, you've got rank 2 of that charm. And then you're constantly kind of trying to level up that charm. And that's not something I'm saying we're going to do, but there's things like that we could do to just continue to give those little incremental ways to always be improving and progressing and pushing your character's power and your character's all the different ways your character can progress. So we'll have more on that as it comes, but the thing in the forefront right now is definitely the ability upgrade system and getting that up and running and iterating on that and making sure that one feels really good.
Awesome, man. And I just muted myself to clear my throat on OBS, so they don't know what that question was for on YouTube. So for those people watching this after the fact, the question was anything that we can share about non-combat gameplay or the vision for non-combat gameplay, just like crafting, etc. Alright, so I think we can do 3 quick-fire yes or no questions to finish up, just for the recording, and then we can hang around afterwards in the channel if we want to, but just so we can keep the recording an hour and a half. We have Joppa. Will there be breeding in the game? And I don't know. I'm assuming that's animal. Just want to clear that up.
I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know.
Mysterious. I like it. Any decision on dual shields for tanks? This was a meme back in the day, but have we got an answer for that?
Dual shields. No plans for dual shields as of right now.
And also, if enough wizards cast lightning in a specific area, will it change the weather environment? That's a cool question.
That's something you're gonna have to try when you're able to get a bunch of wizards in Pantheon and try it out. We'll just have to wait and see what happens.
That would be awesome. Alright guys, we're going to wrap up the recording there. I just want to say a huge thank you very much to Joppa for his time again for round 2. I can't believe we actually got through all those questions. That is amazing. If you have any more, please go to the forums on the official website. I've got the VIP thread. You can continue asking and we'll monitor that for the next couple of days. Otherwise, look forward to the next month's roundtable where I will have a surprise developer and a different topic. And until then, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on board, mate. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody.